Ma'am, this area is strictly for high-ranking flag officers. Who let you in here?
The reception hall at Pinehaven Joint Readiness Center had been designed to look effortless, though nothing inside it was. Every table had been measured into place. Every flag stood at the same angle. Every officer seemed to know where to stand and which conversations mattered. General Camille Avery quietly entered through the east doors at 4:52 p.m., wearing a dark blue suit, low heels, and a temporary visitor badge clipped to her lapel. No uniform, no ribbons, no aide at her shoulder. To most people in the room, she was simply a black woman in her mid-50s who had arrived alone. Camille noticed the first glance before she reached the center aisle. It came from a lieutenant near the refreshments, quick and dismissive, followed by a second look that lingered to make its meaning clear. She had seen that look before. Not surprise, calculation, the silent effort to decide whether she belonged. Across the room, Petty Officer Second Class Nia Monroe was carrying a tray of water glasses, though her personnel file identified her as one of Pinehaven's strongest logistics analysts. Camille knew Nia's name had appeared in records someone had tried to erase. Nia looked up, and something guarded passed across her face. Not recognition of Camille, but recognition of a situation she had witnessed too many times. Lieutenant Nolan Pierce stepped into Camille's path before she could reach the seating area reserved for the visiting delegation. He was sharply groomed. "Mom," he said, polite enough, "this section is restricted." Camille glanced at the empty chair behind him. "I'm aware." Nolan waited for her to explain herself. When she did not, his smile tightened. "Which contractor are you with?" "I'm not a contractor. Support staff?" "No." His eyes moved to her visitor badge, then back to her face. A white civilian advisor wearing the same badge walked past without being stopped. Nolan did not look at him. Camille did. "I'm here for the command review," she said. "The review team hasn't arrived yet. Part of it has." The answer irritated him more than defiance would have. He gave a quiet laugh. "Then what exactly is your rank, Mom?" The word rank landed differently than the rest of the sentence. Too light, too amused. Camille let the silence remain. She had learned that people often revealed more when they believed silence belonged to them. Nolan mistook her restraint for uncertainty. "This room is for senior leadership," he continued. "The service entrance is on the west side." Nia had stopped beside them. Her fingers tightened around the tray, though her voice stayed controlled. "Sir, her name is on the primary guest list." Nolan looked at her as if she had interrupted something trivial. "Then show her where she's supposed to stand." Nia's jaw shifted. "She is supposed to be here, sir." Nearby conversations faded. No one stepped closer. Captain Warren Keene stood less than 20 feet away, watching over the rim of his glass. Camille turned toward him. For 1 second, Keene looked uncomfortable. Then the discomfort vanished behind the calm of a commander protecting an event. "Let's not make a scene," he said. He was looking at Camille, not Nolan. Something cold settled beneath her ribs. Not anger. Something cleaner. Confirmation. Nolan reached toward the badge on her lapel, stopping short of touching it. "We'll have security verify this." Camille opened her notebook and wrote one line. No insignia, no respect. Multiple witnesses. Nolan saw the words and flushed. "Is that supposed to intimidate me?" Before Camille could answer, the double doors opened. 5 flag officers entered, led by Rear Admiral Elena Torres. Torres spotted Camille, stopped, and came to attention. The others followed. Chairs scraped across the floor as the hall rose. Torres saluted. "General Avery," she said, her voice carrying through the silence, "the review team is ready to report." Nolan's hand fell away from Camille's badge. First, the confidence left his eyes. Then the color drained from his face. Finally, he looked at the black woman he had directed toward the service entrance, and understood that the question was no longer what rank she held. The question was what his behavior had revealed before he knew it. 36 hours earlier, Major General Camille Avery had been standing alone in her Pentagon office, reading a document that officially did not exist. It had arrived inside a plain brown envelope with no return address, no signature, and no explanation beyond one handwritten sentence. "Compare the original with what Pinehaven sent to Washington." Camille had learned not to dismiss anonymous material because it lacked ceremony. Truth rarely arrived wearing a polished uniform. Sometimes it came folded twice, smudged at the corners, carried by someone who had decided the system would not protect them. She spread the contents across her desk. There were performance reviews, transfer requests, climate survey excerpts, and printed emails announcing that several complaints had been closed without further action. Nothing alone looked explosive. That was the danger. Each page used the calm language institutions favored when they wanted harm to appear procedural. Communication concerns, cultural fit, leadership readiness, informal resolution. Camille read every phrase twice. Then she noticed the pattern. Black service members at Pine Haven were described with language that rarely appeared in the files of white peers. Assertive became confrontational. Persistent became difficult. Confident became resistant to feedback. She called Colonel Rachel Kim, her senior legal and operations advisor, and asked her to bring one analyst. No staff meeting. No notice to Pine Haven. No electronic forwarding. Rachel arrived 15 minutes later with Captain Owen Mills, a quiet data specialist who trusted numbers more than explanations. For 4 hours, they compared the packet with official records. The differences were small enough to escape casual review and consistent enough to disturb anyone paying attention. Several negative survey responses had vanished from the version submitted by the base. Transfer requests from Black personnel had been coded as career preference rather than workplace concern. Complaints describing unequal treatment had been reclassified as communication disputes. One officer's recommendation for advanced training had disappeared after she questioned why her work had been credited to someone else. "How many?" Camille asked. Owen checked the spreadsheet. "Enough to establish a pattern, not enough to prove who directed it." Rachel folded her arms. "Pine Haven is waiting on approval for a $30 million modernization package. A command climate finding could delay it." Camille looked through the window. She understood the temptation. Large projects created pressure. Pressure created shortcuts. Shortcuts became policy without being written down. "Who controls the reporting process?" she asked. "Captain Warren Keene," Rachel said. "Commanding officer. Strong readiness numbers. Low complaint rate. Excellent reputation with contractors." Camille returned to the files. Low complaint rates could indicate a healthy command. They could also indicate that people had stopped believing complaints mattered. One name appeared repeatedly: Petty Officer Second Class Nia Monroe, age 24, logistics analyst, nearly 3 years at Pine Haven. Her technical scores were high. Her recent leadership assessments had fallen sharply. One complaint existed in an archived reference, but not in the active system. Another had no final disposition. A third was mentioned in an email, then nowhere else. Camille tapped the page. "This file was not lost," she said. "Someone taught the system not to see it." Rachel studied her. "You're considering an unannounced visit. A formal inspection will show us what they prepare for inspection. And an informal arrival?" Camille closed the folder. "It may show us what happens before people know they should behave." Rachel objected. Camille would have no visible rank, no aid, and no protective detail inside a base that had not been told its lead inspector was coming early. Camille listened. She respected Rachel because Rachel never confused loyalty with agreement. When she finished, Camille said, "If they respect me only after they see stars on my shoulders, then I learn nothing about how they treat everyone else." By midnight, the plan was set. The review team would arrive the following afternoon. Camille would enter 90 minutes earlier in civilian clothing with a temporary badge. She would observe, document, and avoid intervention unless safety or evidence required it. Before leaving, Owen placed one final sheet on her desk. It showed the access history for Nia Monroe's missing complaint. The last person to open it had not been an administrator. It had been someone using Captain Keene's command credentials. Camille arrived at Pine Haven Joint Readiness Center at 3:20 the next afternoon in an unmarked government sedan. The base sat beyond longleaf pines near the North Carolina coast, its gates framed by barriers and signs promising vigilance, integrity, and respect. The words were clean. The process beneath them was less so. At the visitor checkpoint, a young sentry took Camille's identification and temporary badge, then looked from the photograph to her face twice. "Who are you meeting, Mom?" he asked. "The command review team. Name of your escort?" "I was not assigned one." His expression tightened. Behind her, another vehicle rolled forward. A white civilian man in a sport coat raised a badge through his open window. The second sentry glanced at it and waved him through without asking him to stop. Camille watched the car disappear beyond the barrier. The first sentry asked whether she was certain she had the correct installation. His tone was not openly disrespectful. That made it more revealing. He sounded helpful, as though guiding someone who had wandered into the wrong place. Camille answered evenly. When he asked a third time whom she expected to meet, she repeated the same response. He called the visitor center, waited for confirmation, and returned her documents. "Proceed to Building 12. Stay in the marked areas." Camille thanked him, then wrote the time, lane number, and questions in her notebook before driving on. She did not yet know whether the delay reflected caution, inexperience, or assumption. One incident proved little. Patterns required patience. At Building 12, a civilian coordinator named Beth Carver greeted Camille beside a table of color-coded badges. Beth scanned the roster, hesitated, and selected a gray card labeled Event Support. "This should get you where you need to go," she said. Camille looked at the card, then at the invitation in Beth's hand. The line beneath her name read Senior Review Delegation. "I believe that category is incorrect." Beth gave a practiced smile. "The colors are mostly administrative." "Then why have different colors?" The smile weakened. Before Beth could answer, the white civilian from the gate approached. He introduced himself as a communications advisor and said he was joining the reception. Beth immediately handed him a blue senior access badge. No additional verification, no question about an escort. Camille said nothing. She looked from his badge to hers. Beth noticed and lowered her voice. "I'm sure this is a clerical mix-up." "Clerical decisions still direct people," Camille replied. Beth replaced the gray card with a blue badge, but her fingers moved too quickly. Inside, Camille followed signs toward the reception hall. Near a service corridor, she saw a young black woman in navy working uniform lifting 2 cases of water onto a cart. The name tape read Monroe. Camille slowed. Naya Monroe was smaller than Camille had imagined from photographs, but her posture carried the stiffness of someone accustomed to being watched. A promotional display stood nearby. On it, Naya's face appeared beneath the words Pin Haven, talent from every. In the photograph, she wore a headset before logistics screens. In the corridor, she was arranging napkins. Camille approached without announcing herself. "Do you work in event support?" Naya looked at Camille's badge, then toward the doorway. "Officially, Mom. What is your specialty?" A pause. Brief but heavy. "Logistics analysis. And today?" Naya adjusted the water cases until their edges aligned. Today they needed a certain kind of help. Camille heard the restraint. Not accusation, not surrender. A statement shaped to survive repetition. "Do they often reassign analysts for receptions?" Naya's eyes moved toward the doorway. "Some analysts more than others." Footsteps sounded inside. A chief petty officer called Naya's name and said the glasses were empty. Her shoulders tightened before she turned. "I should go." Camille stepped aside. Naya pushed the cart forward, then stopped. Without looking back, she said, "The blue badge means you belong in the main room. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Camille watched her disappear through the service door. Then she looked at the smiling photograph, at the word background printed in bold letters, and wrote another note. Public symbol. Private assignment. Same person. The contrast felt carefully arranged. Camille entered the reception hall at 4:40, 12 minutes before Nolan Pierce stepped into her path. She did not move directly toward the reserved seating. Instead, she crossed the room slowly and watched. For 12 minutes, she listened to the words people chose when they believed no senior authority was close enough to care about them. What she heard was quiet, ordinary, and practiced. Pine Haven had arranged itself into invisible levels. Senior officers and civilian contractors occupied the center. Junior personnel stood near walls, doors, and service tables. Most black service members were carrying trays, checking coats, or directing traffic. Most introduced to executives were white. Alone, those facts proved little. Together, they formed a picture. Across the room, a young black lieutenant stood beside an aircraft readiness display. Camille knew he had helped design it. When Captain Keene brought 2 contractors over, he introduced the white commander beside the board and never mentioned the lieutenant. The lieutenant remained still, his smile held too long. Nearby, someone joked that Pinehaven always remembered diversity when cameras arrived. Several officers laughed. Others studied their drinks. Camille wrote without looking down. Recognition redirected. Labor visible, expertise hidden. Humor used as permission. She had closed the notebook when Nolan approached. He wore dress blues fitted with careful precision. His expression was courteous, but the courtesy carried ownership. "Mom, that seating area is reserved." Camille looked at the empty chair beside her. "Reserved for whom?" "Senior leadership and review personnel." "I'm here for the review." Nolan glanced at her blue badge. "That gets you into the building. It doesn't authorize this section." Across the aisle, the white communications advisor from the gate was seated inside the same area, speaking with a colonel. His badge was identical. Camille turned toward him, then back to Nolan. "He appears authorized." Nolan followed her gaze. "He's with the delegation. So am I." A faint smile touched his mouth, because he believed the situation was simple. "Mom, I deal with security for a living. You can usually tell who belongs in a controlled space." "By what?" Camille asked. "Uniform. Credentials. Bearing. He has no uniform." Nolan's smile faded. "He carries himself like he knows where he is." Camille felt an old pressure behind her sternum. It was not surprise. Years earlier, she had been mistaken for a clerk outside her own briefing room. Later, an officer had asked whether she was there to take notes. Experience had not made those moments painless. It taught her control. "And how do I carry myself?" she asked. Nolan shifted closer, lowering his voice as if offering guidance. "Like someone who may have been directed to the wrong entrance." Naya approached with a tray. The glasses trembled almost imperceptibly when she heard him. "Sir," she said, "General Avery's name is on the primary list." Nolan looked at her. "I didn't ask for commentary, Monroe." Her last name cut sharper than his earlier words. Naya remained composed, but color rose in her cheeks. "I checked the list myself." "Then check it again." "There is no need," Camille said. Nolan turned back to her. "There is if you are in a restricted area without verified status." Captain Keene stood close enough to hear. Camille met his eyes. She saw that he knew something had gone wrong. Keene approached with a restrained smile. "Is there a problem?" Nolan answered first. "Just clarifying access, sir." Naya began to speak, but Keene raised one hand. "Let's keep this professional." His gaze settled on Camille. "Everyone is tense before a major review. There's no reason to turn a misunderstanding into a scene." The sentence was smooth, its direction unmistakable. Camille had been questioned. Naya had been silenced. Yet she was being warned against disruption. "Does tension change the rules?" Camille asked. Keene's smile hardened. "No, Mom. Does it change who appears trustworthy?" No one answered. Nolan reached toward her badge, stopping short of contact. "Security can verify this." Camille opened her notebook. No insignia, no respect. Same badge, different standard. Witnessed by command. Nolan read the line upside down. His face flushed. "Is that supposed to intimidate me?" Camille capped her pen. "No, Lieutenant, it is supposed to remember you accurately." The double doors opened before Nolan could answer. Conversation stopped as Rear Admiral Elena Torres entered with 4 flag officers behind her. Torres saw Camille within seconds. Her posture changed, then her expression. She came to attention and saluted. The others followed. Chairs scraped as the hall stood. General Avery Torres said, her voice carrying, "The review team is ready to report." Nolan's hand remained suspended near Camille's badge, then dropped. The confidence in his face did not disappear at once. It broke in stages. First confusion, then calculation, then the recognition that the room had watched his assumptions become evidence. Camille returned the salute. She did not look at Nolan immediately. She studied the room. Officers who had avoided her eyes stood rigidly. Those who had dismissed Naya were suddenly attentive. Rank had accomplished in 1 second what basic dignity had not. Camille removed the badge, looked at it, and clipped it back into place. "This badge has not changed," she said. "Only the way this room sees it has." No one moved. Captain Keene stepped forward, his face carefully composed. "General, I believe there has been a misunderstanding about access." Camille turned toward him. "A misunderstanding by whom?" Keene glanced at Nolan. "Lieutenant Pierce was protecting a controlled area. Did that require him to question every civilian wearing this badge?" Keene paused. "I would need to review the circumstances. You were standing 20 feet away." A faint line appeared beside his mouth. I did not hear every word. Naya lowered her tray onto a table with both hands. The soft clink sounded unusually loud. She still stood apart from the officers, as if the revelation of Camille's rank had changed nothing about where Nia believed she belonged. Nolan finally spoke. "General, I was performing a security check. I had no way of knowing who you were." Camille looked at him. His face was pale, but his shoulders remained squared. He was arguing that ignorance excused judgment. "That is precisely the problem," she said. "You believed my identity determined whether I deserved professional treatment. That isn't what I meant. Intent will be documented. So will conduct." Camille did not raise her voice. Anger would have allowed the room to focus on her emotion. Precision forced attention onto what happened. The room could not mistake restraint for weakness. She turned to Torres. "Admiral, suspend the reception." Torres nodded. Camille continued. "Effective immediately, Pinehaven is under a formal command review. Issue a preservation order covering personnel evaluations, equal opportunity records, access logs, transfer requests, exit interviews, survey data, security footage, and command correspondence for the previous 20 months. Keene's expression shifted. Not surprise. Fear carefully contained. "General, some records include operational material. Then the legal team will separate protected content without altering anything. This could disrupt readiness. Readiness built on hidden information is performance theater, Captain." Several heads turned toward Keene. Camille instructed that no local supervisor would screen witnesses before interviews. Personnel could speak to the review team without permission from their chain of command. No document could be deleted, relabeled, or moved. Any attempt to influence testimony would go directly to Washington. Nolan took a breath. "Am I being relieved?" "You are being removed from reception duties and direct supervisory decisions until your conduct is reviewed," Camille said. "You will receive due process. That is more than assumption offered me." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Camille faced the room. "This review is not being opened because I am a general. It is being opened because what happened to me may have happened to people who could not make 5 flag officers walk through that door." Her eyes found Nia. For the first time, Nia looked directly back. The guardedness remained, but something else appeared beneath it. Possibility. Or the dangerous beginning of trust. As officers began leaving under Torres's direction, Nia approached Camille slowly. She no longer carried the tray. In her hands was a thick white envelope, its corners softened from being hidden and handled many times. "Mom," she said quietly, "I think this belongs with you." Camille accepted it. On the front, written in blue ink, were 8 words, "The things the system says never happened." The envelope contained no dramatic confession, no single document capable of explaining everything. It held something harder to dismiss. Years of ordinary decisions arranged in sequence. Nia sat across from Camille in a conference room. Rachel Kim held a legal pad. Nia kept both hands around a paper cup. Without the tray, she looked younger. She looked like someone who had rehearsed silence until speaking felt dangerous. Camille placed the first document on the table. It was an after-action report from a joint logistics exercise. The model credited to another analyst matched the formulas in Nia's original files. "Tell me what happened," Camille said. Nia's eyes stayed on the page. She explained that she had built the routing model after weeks of overnight work. During the final briefing, a senior officer presented the results using slides she had prepared. Her name appeared nowhere. When she asked why, she was told the command needed a more experienced face for visiting leadership. "Did you challenge that?" Camille asked. "I asked for my contribution to be added to the record." And then Nia gave a small, humorless breath. Her next performance review described her as overly focused on recognition, resistant to coaching, and difficult under pressure. A white male analyst who argued during meetings was praised for confidence and initiative. Naya had saved both evaluations. She had also saved the draft written before she complained. In the draft, her supervisor recommended her for advanced leadership training. In the final version, that recommendation had disappeared. The next pages documented smaller events that became heavier when placed together. Naya had been reassigned from technical duty to reception support on days when visiting officials arrived. She had been told she presented a better image near the front of the room, but was rarely invited to brief the work she helped produce. A chief once joked that the base liked to place certain faces where cameras could see them. When Naya objected, the remark was recorded as a misunderstanding. Another email warned that continued complaints might indicate she was not a cultural fit for Pinehaven. Camille read without interrupting. Anger moved through her as weight, not heat. She knew how institutions softened prejudice until it sounded like management. No one wrote that Naya was being punished for being a black woman who demanded credit. They wrote that she needed to improve tone. No one admitted they wanted her visible but unheard. They called it event support. "How many complaints did you file?" Camille asked. 3 formal, 2 informal. Responses, 1 closed without interview. 1 changed into a performance discussion. 1 disappeared. Naya looked at Rachel. "The informal ones became reasons people stopped trusting me." She described being removed from a leadership course despite meeting the score requirement. She described colleagues lowering their voices when she entered. She described learning to write emails as though every sentence might be used to prove she was angry. The discipline required to appear calm had exhausted her more than the work itself. Camille asked why she had kept the records. Naya's fingers tightened around the cup. "Because every time something happened, someone explained it until I wasn't sure I had seen it correctly. I started saving proof so I could remember I wasn't imagining my own life." For the first time, her voice cracked. She stopped, embarrassed by the sound. Camille did not rush to comfort her. She let the silence protect rather than pressure. "You should not have needed a private archive to remain certain of your own experience," she said. "I cannot return the time this cost you, but I can make sure the truth is not renamed again." Naya nodded once. Rachel then opened the digital history of the altered evaluation. One name appeared in the revision log: Chief Petty Officer Lucas Bennett. Naya looked away. Bennett had signed the final review and later advised her to stop asking questions if she wanted a future at Pinehaven. He was still in the building. For Naya, that link carried a familiar face and betrayal. Camille closed the folder. The evidence had moved beyond Nolan Pierce. It now had a chain, and the next link was waiting 1 floor below. Chief Petty Officer Lucas Bennett entered the interview room at 9:15 that night, looking like a man who had decided what he could afford to remember. He was 41, respected in logistics, and less comfortable than his posture suggested. Camille had seen his kind of fear before. It was not fear of truth. It was fear of what truth might cost after years built around silence. Rachel placed Naya's 2 evaluations side by side. The first praised her skill, judgment, and leadership potential. The final version described limited adaptability, poor communication, and difficulty within command culture. Both carried Bennett's electronic signature. "Do you recognize these?" Camille asked. Bennett studied the pages silently. "I recognize the format." That was not the question. His mouth tightened. "Yes, Mom." He said he supervised many reviews and recalled few edits. Rachel turned a laptop toward him. The revision history showed his account removing the recommendation for leadership training at 7:42 p.m. 3 days after Naya filed a complaint. Bennett leaned back. The ventilation system sounded loud. "I may have received additional guidance," he said. "From whom?" "I don't remember the exact conversation." Camille slid an email across the table. Captain Keene had scheduled a private meeting with Bennett 20 minutes before the changes began. The subject line read personal engagement. Bennett stared at it. His first defense disappeared, replaced by something more honest and less flattering. Captain Keene said Monroe was creating unnecessary noise during a sensitive period, he said. The modernization review was approaching. He believed sending her to leadership training would reward disruption. Did you agree? Not entirely. But you signed. Bennett looked at his hands. Had 2 years left before retirement eligibility. Had a mortgage. I told myself one evaluation would not decide her future. Naya was absent, yet the empty chair beside him felt occupied. Camille's voice remained level. Systems like this do not require everyone to be cruel, Chief. They require enough decent people to decide their silence has no victim. Bennett flinched. The movement was slight. He explained that complaints involving Lieutenant Pierce were usually handled verbally. Pierce delivered results, had influential supporters, and was under consideration for an award. Junior personnel were encouraged to resolve concerns inside the team. Formal records were described as harmful to cohesion. Those who insisted on filing were often labeled difficult or unsuited to operational culture. Who gave those instructions? Rachel asked. Bennett hesitated, then named Keene and 2 department heads. He admitted climate survey comments were reviewed before submission. Comments considered repetitive, emotional, or unrelated to readiness were removed. Rachel asked who decided what counted as emotional. Bennett had no answer. Camille did. The people protected by the process had made themselves judges of the language used by those harmed through it. Bennett's cooperation did not erase his role. He would be protected from retaliation for truthful testimony, but he would not be protected from accountability. Relief and shame crossed his face. For once, he seemed to understand that caution had never been neutral. It had already chosen a side. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "There is a folder," he said. "Temporary climate files. It was created so unresolved material would not appear in the official database during external reviews. Where is it stored? Restricted command drive. Who has access? Captain Keene, the executive officer, and me. Keene is the highest-level owner. Rachel contacted the forensic team." The folder remained locked but present. Inside were scanned complaints, draft survey results, exit interviews, and notes instructing administrators to delay classification until after the funding decision. One file contained Naya's missing complaint. Another described Nolan telling a black officer that advancement required making senior leaders comfortable. A third recorded Keene directing staff to manage perceptions rather than create a paper trail. Camille stood before the monitor as files opened. The command had not failed to see the problem. It had seen it clearly, named it privately, and hidden it deliberately. Bennett had provided the key, but he had also helped lock the door. By midnight, the investigation no longer depended on interpretation. Pinehaven's silence had a storage location, an access history, and Captain Warren Keene's name attached to both. By the second morning, Pinehaven no longer resembled the polished command Camille had entered. The buildings and flags had not changed, but the story the base told about itself had begun to separate from the records beneath it. The forensic team recovered 30 formal concerns from the previous 20 months. 25 had been closed as informal resolutions. 4 had been converted into performance matters against the people who raised them. 1 had vanished from the official system entirely. Exit interviews from black service members described unequal recognition, selective discipline, and fear of retaliation. None appeared in the command summary submitted to Washington. Keene used no openly discriminatory language. His emails were careful. Handle at the lowest level. Avoid unnecessary documentation. Protect mission continuity. Prevent personnel friction from affecting modernization. Alone, each sentence seemed defensible. Together, they formed a method. Prejudice had not been written as policy. It had been translated into administration. It looked neutral on paper because the people harmed by it had been edited out of the official story. Nolan Pierce entered the interview room at noon beside military counsel. His uniform was exact. He acknowledged questioning Camille but insisted he had acted because an unidentified civilian had entered a restricted area. Camille placed the access log in front of him. 2 white civilian advisors with identical blue badges had entered without challenge. 3 black visitors had faced additional verification. Nolan had questioned 2 of them. "Different circumstances," he said. "Describe the difference." He referred to bearing, familiarity, and security instinct. Camille asked whether those standards existed in written protocol. They did not. "You are reducing a judgment call to appearance," Nolan said. "No," Camille replied. "I am asking what informed your judgment before you knew anything about me." Nolan continued. "Had I known your position, I would have handled it differently." Camille let him hear his own sentence. "Are you saying your conduct was wrong because I am a general?" she asked. "Or because no person should have been treated that way?" Nolan's jaw tightened. "I'm saying rank changes access. My badge established access. My face changed your interpretation of it." For the first time, his composure weakened. He looked at his counsel, then Camille. She did not need him to confess to hatred. The evidence showed something more common and dangerous. He believed his instincts were neutral, even when they repeatedly placed black people under suspicion. Camille showed him Naya's reassignment records, witness statements, and a prior note describing his comment that some people advanced because leadership wanted the right image. Nolan denied targeting Nia. He said she was sensitive and misread direct communication. "That language appears in every file after she complained," Camille said. "Before that, she was described as composed, capable, and ready for leadership." Nolan had no answer. Captain Keen's interview began an hour later. He arrived without his reception confidence. He admitted reviewing climate materials, but argued that commanders must distinguish serious complaints from ordinary workplace conflict. Camille asked why nearly every complaint about racial disparity had been downgraded. Keen said coincidence could not be ruled out. Rachel then presented the hidden folder, access logs, and funding timeline. Keen's face remained still, though a pulse moved at his temple. "I was protecting readiness," he said. "You were protecting a report," Camille answered. "There is a difference." He insisted that controversy could have cost Pinehaven $30 million and harmed careers. Camille leaned forward. "You treated the people reporting harm as a threat to the institution. Then you called their silence stability." Keen looked toward the window. "I did not want to make the situation larger." Camille placed Nia's altered review, the deleted surveys, and the hidden complaints across the table. "You did not make it smaller. You made the people inside it feel smaller." Nothing dramatic followed. Keen did not confess. Nolan did not collapse. Real accountability rarely arrived in one cinematic moment. It arrived through records, contradictions, and the slow removal of excuses. By evening, Camille understood Pinehaven's full failure. Nolan had acted from bias. Bennett had signed from fear. Keen had managed the consequences for appearance. Each man had made a different choice. Together, those choices had created a system. 10 days after the reception, Camille signed a 48-page command review and sent it to senior defense leadership. The report separated Pinehaven's failure into 3 categories: individual misconduct, leadership neglect, and systemic distortion of personnel records. Camille had insisted on that structure because punishment without diagnosis would allow the command to remove a few names and preserve the habits that produced them. The findings did not arrive as a dramatic announcement. They moved through official channels, legal reviews, and personnel boards. That pace frustrated some witnesses, especially those who had waited years to be believed. Camille understood the frustration, but she also knew accountability built on shortcuts could be challenged and reversed. Every conclusion had to survive scrutiny. The distinction mattered to her. Nolan Pierce was removed from direct supervisory authority and reassigned to a planning office where he could not evaluate junior personnel. His Bronze Star recommendation was suspended pending review of the statements supporting it. He received a formal reprimand and was ordered to complete a 20-month leadership accountability program that included supervised instruction on bias, command climate, and professional judgment. Complaints previously handled informally under his name were reopened. The review did not erase his operational achievements. It refused to let those achievements erase everyone else. Nolan wrote separate apology letters to Camille and Nia. His letter to Camille admitted that he had treated familiarity as evidence of belonging and uncertainty as evidence against her. His letter to Nia was longer. He wrote that he had dismissed her reactions instead of examining his conduct. Camille delivered the letter unopened. "You are not required to answer," she told Naya. "An apology may be part of his responsibility. Forgiveness is not part of yours." Naya placed the envelope in her desk drawer. She did not tear it up, but she did not read it that day. Captain Warren Keene was relieved of command for loss of confidence. A separate investigation examined his use of restricted files, the alteration of survey data, and efforts to delay formal classification of complaints. The $30 million modernization package was paused rather than canceled. Funding would be reconsidered only after Pinehaven met external oversight requirements. Keene had argued that complaints threatened the project. In the end, hiding them created the greater threat. He submitted retirement paperwork, but its approval remained pending until the investigation concluded. Lucas Bennett received a formal reprimand for signing an evaluation he knew did not reflect Naya's performance. His cooperation was documented, but it did not erase his decision. He was ordered to correct the review, provide testimony in the reopened cases, and complete ethics remediation before holding another evaluative role. Bennett accepted the findings without appeal. When he met Naya to sign the corrected document, he began to explain why he had been afraid. Naya stopped him gently. "I understand that you were afraid," she said. "I need you to understand that your fear became part of my record." Bennett lowered his eyes and signed. Naya's original complaints were substantiated. Her altered evaluation was removed. Her contribution to the logistics model was restored in official records, and her application for leadership development was reconsidered by an external panel. Camille refused suggestions that Naya be promoted immediately as a symbolic response. Naya deserved a fair process, not another decision made for appearance. The review also identified 6 other service members whose evaluations required correction. 3 officers were removed from supervisory duties, and 2 civilian administrators were reassigned pending further investigation. Consequences came in layers, not waves. Some were visible. Others were buried in corrected files, restored opportunities, and conversations people could no longer avoid. On her final evening at Pinehaven, Camille returned to the empty reception hall. The chairs had been stacked, the flags were covered. Nothing remained of the moment when 5 officers stood and Nolan learned her rank. Camille looked toward the place where Nia had held the tray. The room had defended Camille only after authority entered through the door. That fact stayed with her. She wrote one final question in her notebook. If Nia had stood there alone, who would have stood for her? The report could assign responsibility. Reform would be measured by the answer. 5 months later, Camille returned to Pinehaven in full uniform. 2 silver stars announced what the blue visitor badge once had not. No one delayed her, but she watched the process instead. The sentry checked her identification, checked the access list, and asked the same questions he had asked the white contractor ahead. Professional, consistent, unremarkable. Change often looked smaller than harm. Inside Building 12, the old display had become a digital board showing command climate actions. Pinehaven had an independent reporting office outside local command, a 30-day initial review deadline, protected case records, and external personnel audits. Command staff could no longer delete survey responses. Promotions, discipline, training, and event assignments were reviewed for unexplained disparities. Witness training addressed more than obvious misconduct. It taught personnel how silence, selective enforcement, and unequal standards formed systems. The reforms proved only that denial had become harder. The change remained uneven. Some officers embraced the new rules, others followed them, because audits made avoidance visible. Nia had learned not to confuse compliance with conviction. Still, consistency gave people room to speak before courage became desperation. 2 technicians had challenged unequal assignments through the office, and both cases were reviewed without supervisors controlling the process. Neither complaint became a scandal. That mattered. A healthy institution should not require humiliation, hidden evidence, or a general's arrival before correcting a wrong. Camille saw no perfect command, only one beginning to accept that dignity was part of readiness rather than an obstacle. Camille entered a classroom and found Nia Monroe standing before 20 junior members. Naya wore her working uniform. On the screen behind her was a logistics map from the exercise once credited elsewhere. Her name appeared beneath it as Lab Analyst. She explained how information failed when people altered data to protect desired answers, then connected that lesson to leadership. A command cannot correct what it trains itself not to record, she said. Her voice was steady, though Camille noticed a pause before the final word. Courage had made speaking possible, not effortless. Naya had been accepted into a leadership development program after external review. She had not received a ceremonial promotion or public award for Pinehaven's image. She received what should have existed from the beginning: accurate credit, an honest evaluation, and a fair opportunity. Lucas Bennett sat in the back row. He took notes, answered when called upon, and carried the discomfort of learning that regret mattered only when it changed behavior. Afterward, Naya approached Camille. "General, Petty Officer." They briefly smiled. Camille asked what had changed most. Before, when someone reported something, the first question was whether they were sure it happened. Now the first question is what needs to be checked. That is progress. It is, but people still watch who gets believed. Camille nodded. They should. They walked toward the lobby. Naya said she had read Nolan's letter. She would not respond. "He wrote that he sees the moment differently now," she said. "I hope he does, but I don't need his understanding to make my experience real." Camille felt pride, but claimed no ownership of Nia's growth. "No," she said, "you never did." At the east doors, they paused where Nolan had blocked Camille. A new sign listed clear access requirements. Nothing about bearing, appearance, or seeming to belong. Naya smiled. "It is strange that fairness can look like a sign and a checklist." "Fairness often needs structure," Camille said. "Good intentions become unreliable under pressure." Afternoon light crossed the parade field. Camille remembered the hall rising for the flag officers. Rank could make people stand. It could open doors and end arguments. But it could not create character. The real test of this place, she told Naya, was never how it treated a general after learning her rank. It was how it treated people before knowing what power they had. At the gate, another visitor presented identification. The sentry followed the same process, unchanged by the face behind the glass. No applause followed. One person simply received the same standard as the last. Camille watched the barrier rise, knowing lasting change rarely announced itself. Sometimes it was the absence of old humiliation. Sometimes respect arrived before rank.